Hey, my friends, welcome back. And this is actually going to be episode one of the paradigm shift. And what the paradigm shift is all about is just as it says, it's about shifting your paradigm. It's about shifting the way that you think and the way that you model reality. So, let's start with the Bruce Lee quote: take what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. I hope that that's what you do in all areas of your life, that you go and seek out other people who are getting the results that you want or in some other way are qualified to give you some type of advice, and you listen to them, even if you disagree with them, and then you take from what they've said whatever is useful, and then you discard what is not, and then you add what is uniquely your own. So if I say anything on these that shock you or sound different than what you've heard others say, or that breaks with your mental model of reality, then good, right? It's supposed to shock you a little bit. It's supposed to move you a little bit because it's in the unknown where all learning happens, right? It's in the unknown where all growth happens, where all change happens, and it's in the known that we become stuck. And so I want to share with you some of the ways in which I model reality, right? In particular, health. Because if you look around and you see most people, right, you would see what is common, but we don't see what is natural. And we often mistake what is common for what is natural. And so, for example, let's just talk about the health of the average American. The health of the average American is poor, as you know. And I like to do this idea where it's like a mental experiment, but it's also a real experiment I've done, and I'm sure you have too. If you stop at a highway rest stop and you get out to go to the bathroom, that's a really nice cross-section of America. You get to see people from all over the country, all different states, especially before all the lockdowns began. You would really see a lot of people from all over. And you would see all different ages, kids to grandparents, and everything in between. Another example of this is going to a big store, like a Walmart or a Target or a big grocery store. At these types of places, you again get to see a huge cross-section of Americans. You get to see a big cross-section of what we look like. And it's actually fascinating because it's very clear if you look at somebody and they look unhealthy, you can make that judgment. And you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be a doctor. You don't need to have taken any of their vital signs. You don't need to have done any lab work on them. You don't need to do any of that. You can look at many people and say, that's not a healthy person. And of course, that doesn't work in all cases, right? There are some people who might look healthy, but then are not healthy, right? That idea of being like skinny fat, right? But when you look at most people, it's a pretty clear tell what's going on with them. And I live down in Georgia, and my family's from up in New England, so my wife and I spend a lot of time traveling back and forth from the north down to Georgia. And we've gotten to see a lot of highway rest stops. We've gotten to see a lot of Americans. And it truly saddens me. Like, it hits somewhere in my heart that says that's not right. It's not right that so many Americans are so unhealthy. And I pulled up some statistics to discuss this proposal I'm making, that most Americans aren't healthy, which shouldn't be shocking to you. But here's some simple numbers. And the reason that we're picking diabetes to talk about is that diabetes represents, and this is going to be a concept that we'll unpack in greater detail in episodes to come, but your body's always adapting. And it can either positively adapt or it can negatively adapt. And it can either move you closer to abundant health or it can move you closer to death, which would be the absence of health, the total absence of health. And because we have the ability to adapt directionally, it's important to think about which direction do you adapt. And diabetes is actually an example, type 2, that is. Type 2 diabetes is a very good example of the maladaptive process, of somebody who has day after day after day adapted on a cellular level all the way up to the whole organism. And so for those of you that don't know, type 2 diabetes is generally regarded as a hormonal and glucose-related issue, right? The hormone insulin, glucose as in sugar, and you have an inability to properly manage the glucose in your body by getting it into cells and by getting it processed in your body. So, but what I think is interesting about diabetes is that it's a systemic issue, right? Because it deals with your entire circulatory system. And so every cell in your body is affected by diabetes. And in fact, three of the major problems that diabetics have are with their eyes and their vision, with their kidney function, and then also, more broadly, with their nervous system, because your nervous system requires blood flow, and diabetics have, to keep it simple, improper physiology, right? Their blood still circulates, but they're not properly transporting energy in and out of cells. And all this is governed by insulin. And insulin's a hormone, and there are a bunch of these in your body. And what's interesting to notice is that just because your insulin has an issue, it doesn't mean that it stays just with your insulin. You have whole cascades of hormones and neurotransmitters and proteins that are coded for and made, all the different physiological processes in your body. You can think of them as kind of having like master switches that turn on and turn off, and then many aspects of your physiology will get in line with that. And so people who have diabetes don't just have an issue with insulin, they don't just have an issue with glucose, they have an issue with the entire function of their body. And it's illustrated by the glucose-insulin issue, which is often at the forefront of the conversation. But with diabetics, you see a complete metabolic breakdown inside these people, right? Obesity is one of the major risk factors for diabetes. And as we mentioned, the blindness, the kidney dysfunction, and the neuropathy or the neurological issues that these folks have. They also have a much higher rate of hypertension. 2/3 of diabetics are hypertensive. And if you're a diabetic, you have a 2 to 4 times greater likelihood of dying of heart-related issues than somebody who's not a diabetic, right? So we've mentioned a whole bunch of the systems in the body, right? We mentioned the circulatory system. We mentioned the hormonal system. We mentioned the neurological system. We mentioned the visual system. We mentioned a whole bunch of systems in the body. And diabetes is going to affect even more than what we talked about today. So the reason that we took this little detour into diabetes was that diabetes is one of these examples of how the body systemically breaks down, of how the body systemically maladapts. And that you don't get type 2 diabetes because you ate 4 cakes last night, right? You get type 2 diabetes because you have progressively and consistently lived in a lifestyle that has forced your body to choose the lesser of 2 bad options. But eventually, if you keep choosing bad options, your system will have maladapted. And at a certain point, that maladaptation manifests in a clinical sense as a full-blown disease, because it's finally reached the level of clinical significance to hit whether it's the blood markers that they're looking at, or the BMI that they're looking at, or any of these other functions in your body that they're looking at in order to diagnose you. But you didn't get to that state like that. You got to that state by day after day by day of building into a maladaptive state. And the good news is the opposite side exists as well. You can day after day after day build your body up to health. You can continue to positively adapt day after day after day. And all of your systems can start to function better and more vibrantly. And that's my prayer for you, is that you will do that you will exercise. I don't like the word exercise, actually. I shouldn't have said that. That you will train your physiology whether it's through strength training or aerobic training or some other form like of movement, such as yoga. I hope that you'll do that you'll engage your body, right? You'll move differently, you'll eat differently, you'll live differently, you'll think differently than most people. Because what I'm about to drop on us are some of the statistics of type 2 diabetes, right? And the prevalence. And this gets back to that idea of if you're at a highway rest stop, what do most Americans look like, right? If you're at a football game, what do most Americans look like? They don't look healthy, right? They don't look like this guy back here with skin on top, right? They look a lot rounder in places that they shouldn't. They don't move as well. Are they able to do a full squat? Are they able to jump? Are they able to do a push-up, right? Most Americans can't do these things. Most Americans can't do a pull-up. And if you functionally can't move your body, that's a major sign of maladaptation. In fact, our ancestors, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, were significantly stronger than us, right? And you can actually see on for example, on a bone, you have a protuberance, and that's where muscles attach. And there's this principle called Wolff's Law that states that whenever a force is applied to a bone, that bone will lay down more bone in order to become stronger in that direction. Right? And this makes sense. That's how our skeletons mature and develop and stay robust. And in fact, our ancestors, because their muscles were used so much more, they were so much more active, and their muscle strength was much higher because they were constantly doing things. I mean, think about it. You had to rip food apart with your hands as opposed to with a knife and a fork or however else we have processed our food in our environment to make it very easy, very tangible. And so our ancestors, they believe, had 5 to 10 times the strength that we do. And the way that they measure this is by looking at the bony protuberances, right? These entheses, which is where the muscle attaches into a bone. And these points of origin for these muscles are actually, the bony points of origin are actually larger on our ancestors than they are on us because the difference in force that was applied to these bones. So our ancestors were incredibly robust. They could do pull-ups, they could do push-ups, they could do squats. Now, they didn't call them these things, right? They climbed a tree, right? They squatted down to eat or to go to the bathroom. So these were functional movement patterns. They didn't train it. They didn't say, oh, I'm going to do 3 sets of 10 pull-ups today. They didn't do anything like that. But maybe they climbed a tree to go knock down a beehive so they could get honey, right? And so in that process, there was pushing, pulling in all the different movements that our body is meant to go through. And so today, most Americans are functionally broken. And if we look at the metabolic function of people, back to the diabetes conversation, 23 million Americans have type 2 diabetes. Another 7 million have type 2 diabetes, but are not diagnosed for it yet. And then so that puts us at 30 million Americans have full-blown diabetes. And so that is, you've now reached a line in the sand that is clinically delineated that says, no diabetes, diabetes, right? So 30 million Americans are over the line, which means that they have had a very long process of maladaptation that's brought them there. Now, this is this number that's absolutely staggering. Another 86 million Americans are pre-diabetic, which means that they are in this gray zone because you have one line for diabetes and then you have one line for normal blood glucose. That's how they measure it. And there's a gap in between those two lines. And 86 million Americans are in that group. And it's very likely that unless they change how they live, that they will eventually cross the finish line into full diabetes. That's crazy. And another study from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, said that 1/3 of Americans born in the year 2000 will develop diabetes. So, and that's right on track with the rest of the numbers that we have. And honestly, it's probably only getting worse because processed food is only more abundant now. And especially with the lockdowns, people are even more sedentary than they had been and even more fearful than they had been. And we know that there's a whole relationship between cortisol and eating and the way that we build adipose tissue and the way that we partition energy, cortisol changes all of that. And cortisol is the master hormone of stress. So with this said, you could say that the whole country is on this shift towards maladaptation, right? Most Americans are not functionally healthy. And that hurts me. That hurts me really bad. And in fact, that's one of the things I'm most passionate about for why I'm being a chiropractor, why I'm becoming a chiropractor, and why I want to serve my community, is because I don't want to see people in this maladaptive place, because that maladaptive place brings with it a tremendous amount of suffering. And we'll just put this in there because I think this is important. There's no such thing as living forever, right? We all know this. There's no fountain of youth. And so oftentimes when I talk to people about having abundant health, they might say something to the effect of, well, eventually you die anyway. And yes, you do, right? Even if you have the most abundant health for your whole life long, there will come a day when you don't live anymore. And so the goal of abundant health is not to live for centuries and become eternal. The goal of abundant health is to maximize the time you have in this body on this planet so that you can be as functional as possible, so that you can be as engaged as possible, so that you can be as productive as possible. Because I really do believe that every single human has a unique reason for existing. And with that unique reason for existing, they have to manifest the fullness of their potential. They have to bring it to bear in the world. Because when we look out at the world and we see certain people, like let's take Gandhi or Martin Luther King, right? When we take these people and we look at them and you say, oh my gosh, look what one person did. How different would 1 billion people's lives in India be if Gandhi never existed? Or if Gandhi existed but he was too sick to do what he was supposed to do? Or if he was just not engaged in life. Maybe he was healthy, but he was just not engaged. He was not going for it. He was not tapping his full potential. 1 billion people in India would have a very different life today. Same thing with Martin Luther King. And you could do this and go back through the ages with all sorts of people who were able to get the most out of themselves in some way that is so unique that we still think and talk about them today. And unfortunately, most people do not tap their full potential. They do not live so vibrantly that they change the world around them. And I really do believe that every single person, you listening to this video, are meant to change the world. You are meant to tap into the fullness of your potential and change the world around you. And change the world around you for years to come. And what is an absolute fundamental and cornerstone of that is health. If you're too sick to get out of bed, if you're too sick to move your body, if you're too sick to feel vibrant and to be able to get your energy levels up and to get excited about life and to tap your full potential, you will not tap your potential. You will tap some, but not all. And that's not good enough. Life is too short. The world is way too complicated. And it needs you. It needs all of you. It doesn't need part of you. It needs all of you. And that's, I think, the eternal challenge for all of us, right? And that's why I get so excited. That's why I'm talking with a little bit of speed in my voice and a little bit of energy behind it. Because I am excited about this idea that we all have a potential that we all must tap so we can change the world around us. And I fundamentally believe that the potential I'm meant to tap is this idea of altering paradigms, of shifting paradigms so that people can start to understand that their health is the most important prerequisite for tapping their potential. A fully healthy, a fully vibrant, a fully alive body is also a fully vibrant, fully alive mind. And if you don't have the clarity of mind and body, then it's going to be very hard to tap into your spirit. It's going to be very hard to tap into your spirit. And your spirit is where all the potential is. Your spirit is what makes you so unique, right? We are more than just the atoms that make up our body. And well, I hope I didn't lose anybody there because we got a little metaphysical. But I really do believe that we are a soul having a physical experience, that our soul becomes embodied so that it has this opportunity to express its potential. And I also believe the second half of that is that your soul is meant to level up. Your soul is meant to grow, and it's meant to become more because of your time here on earth and because of your actions here on earth. And so again, the only way to level up the soul, the only way to make the impact out on others is to have your health. Because if you don't have your health, you can't fully tap into the potential of your body and your mind. And that, by definition, if you don't have 100% function and 100% expression of health through your body and your mind, your potential is automatically going to be dampened. So this brings us back to that idea of what is common is not what is natural. And what is natural is to be vibrantly healthy, to be abundantly healthy. But what is common is to be very sick, as we said. Tens of millions, over 100 million Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And by the way, we're not talking about type 1 diabetes, which is in many ways an autoimmune condition that usually affects children and then continues to persist throughout life. Because out of all the cases of diabetes in America, 95% of them are type 2 diabetes. And so that's what we've focused on, this maladaptation in the body. And I picked diabetes because it's a very good example of if something systemically breaks down in your body, then you have all these downstream effects, right? People do die of diabetes, but usually they die of complications of diabetes, right? They die of a heart attack, or they die of kidney failure, or they die of something else, right? Some infection that they can't heal because their immune system is dampened through diabetes. Their circulatory system is dampened through diabetes. So the point is that when you have this systemic breakdown of your physiology, which so many Americans have, right? I'm picking the diabetes thing because it's an example of this broken physiology that plagues millions and millions of Americans. And so for you, when you look around, I don't want you to fall into the trap of thinking what is common is what is natural, because it is not your destiny to be unhealthy. It is not your destiny to be sick for years and years and years of your life, because that's what it is if you have diabetes. You're sick. You're metabolically dysfunctional. You're metabolically maladapted. And you don't die of diabetes the day you get it. You might live for decades and decades and decades after getting it, which means that you are going to have decades and decades and decades of less than 100% expression of your potential. You're going to have decades and decades and decades of suffering. And that is also going to negatively affect your world in the world of all the people around you. So, my friends, what we want to dive into is this idea of shifting paradigms. And the lesson for this first episode is going to be that what is common is not what is natural, and that we should be seeking what is natural. We should be seeking the innate potential for health that every single human being has. And with that, obviously everybody has a different 100%, right? Everybody's full potential is unequal, right? Like, for example, I wouldn't be a very good jockey for a horse. I'm way too tall, okay? Jockeys are usually very small dudes. I'm 6'2", 185 pounds. I wouldn't be a good jockey, right? That's not part of my potential. So, and this is true too. Like, I take care of patients right now who are in their 70s. And when I speak to them about their health potential is not my health potential. However, what I always say to them is I say, hey, your health potential is your potential. Let's get as close to it as we possibly can. Because whatever your 100% is, it would be a lot better to be at that or near to that than at 50%. And that makes sense, right? I'm sure you can agree with that. And they certainly agree with that. They say, yeah, you know what? That does make sense. Let me work on myself. Let me start to take the actions to become a healthier human. And that's it right there, guys. That if we can achieve 100% health, if we can live in a state of abundant health, and that doesn't mean you never get sick. That doesn't mean that you won't die. That doesn't mean any of that stuff. That's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is if you're really, truly living at 100% and your body is on and it's going, you're going to be able to achieve what you're actually here for. And if it's not, you're going to have a much harder time achieving it. And in all likelihood, you probably won't achieve what you're meant to achieve. You might achieve part of it, but not all of it. And I really do believe that that is that is a profound disservice to do to yourself and to every human on this planet and every human that will come after you. Because let's go back to Gandhi and Martin Luther King. If we didn't have them, if they hadn't lived the lives that they lived, how different would your life be today? Or how different would millions and billions of lives be if they hadn't tapped their full potential? And within you is a similar level of potential. You may not feel it, you may not even believe me when I say this. But again, this is about shifting paradigms. Within you is the capability to change the world. And within you is the ability for abundant health. My friends, I love and appreciate you. Adapt and thrive.